for the schut. Thanks, Chaya. It was great to get your message, and have the schut to give an introduction. And Rosh Yeshiva, it's wonderful to see you. And how you, Rabbi Masinta? Good to see you too.
Rabbi.
So Baruch Hashem, I'm coming to you from Talmud in Israel. I'm opposite one of your Talmidim, Darren Platsky, that everybody knows well. And it's a beautiful community here. There's Howard Abrams is here. Lots of different people from Yeshiva College community. So the Rosh Yeshiva's legacy is everywhere, and it's amazing to be in this sort of like far out town, but to be a part of that. In terms, by way of introduction, I was thinking of the Pirkei Avot shiur specifically, and it was my huge zchut to spend so much close time with the Rosh Yeshiva, whether it be in schlepping in the car or sitting in the office, or listening to the Rosh Yeshiva's weekly vortim to the Talmidim, and to have the Rosh Yeshiva dance in the field when we did whatever celebration it was, whether it was beginning of the year or Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim, whatever it was. And to daven in the Rosh Yeshiva's presence, to be amazed, even talk, and all those things. It really was an amazing zchut, and I learned so much from who the Rosh Yeshiva was in terms of his demut and his living example. When I think particularly around the Pirkei Avot shiur, it was always wonderful to see all the ladies coming in and lining up for the shiur, and then going out reluctantly at the end of the shiur each week, and that was the sort of the space of the Rosh Yeshiva in the office was one that I found really mind blowing, and whether I was walking past and it was the Pirkei Avot shiur and seeing everybody hang on his every word, particularly around Pirkei Avot, which obviously I'm sure has been shared, typifies the Rosh Yeshiva in being a walking example of everything that the Torah stands for, or it was just through my door hearing the Rosh Yeshiva on a phone call, and seeing him reaching out to the people that nobody else reached out to just his love and care and amazing connection to everybody weekly, consistently, in every way imaginable and unimaginable. He would just go to great lengths, and then that his door was always open. Whatever was going on, because of his approach of just being that warm, open, not letting anything become more than it needs to be. Everybody should just walk in and feel that the Rosh Yeshiva is there for them at every single moment. It was like that for us as management and teachers and Talmidim of the Rosh Yeshiva. It was like that for his Talmidim and Talmidot and the community that learned with him, and certainly for his family. There were those moments when the Engelbergs used to come in to say hello to Rosh Yeshiva, and he used to always give them something special. So everybody in every way has had a unique relationship, but it was all typified by that love and appreciation that the Rosh Yeshiva showed unconditionally and endlessly. And I'll end off with just one thing that I always remember the Rosh Yeshiva spoke to me about was the Eimta de Tzibura. That before he spoke, he felt before any time he taught and before any time he spoke, he would always prepare as if it was the first time, because of what the Gemara calls aim to the tzibura, which is like a fear and awe of the tzibur. But I think just like the same term of yirat shamayim can be read as yira, as fear, but more as yira from re'iyah, from seeing, from reverence, from appreciation. And I think that the Rosh Yeshiva and why Pirkei Avot is so seminal to who he is and what he teaches was because of his yira for the tzibur, because he was able to see and revere and appreciate every aspect of every person. And he knew that if he was using one moment of one person's time, then he had to invest in that. He had to make it special. He had to make it uplifting. He had to speak to their heart in their way. And I'm grateful to have been a recipient in many ways of those moments from the Rosh Yeshiva. So thank you, Rosh Yeshiva. And to take up a few moments within this special space is a great zchut. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chaya, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. I don't really see you, but good to hear your voice, and thank you for the very warm and kind things you said. The years we spent together are very meaningful for me, equally, perhaps even more so than for you, because I always saw in you a potential that you rarely see anywhere. From the day you arrived here as a very, very young man. And there isn't a day that goes by that we don't miss you, and we do miss you. There's no way. We wish you every bracha b'tzlacha, and I'm sure you're going to make a great success in Eretz Yisrael on a much bigger canvas and a much bigger format. But we miss you. You played an important role, a major role, and the voice lingers on, the message carries on, and I thank you so much for those very warm words of introduction, which I really don't deserve. As far as Imsa the Tzivur is concerned, in my case, it remains the original fear. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just what it is. I always think I'm not ready enough for my tzivur, as I am not ready now. But I slept a little longer this afternoon than I should have, and I'm behind the 8 ball, so let's see what we can do. Right? And we're still close enough to the beginning of the Mishnayos to keep in front of us the Masorah. The Masorah of Pirkei is based on. First of all, as everyone knows, the Mishnah began, Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. It began with the name, Moshe. And Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, and the Torah uses the word Kibel, because being a mortal man, he couldn't possibly hand over whatever Hashem had to offer, because he couldn't take it in. There's no way a physical man of flesh and blood, and the Shem, of course, could possibly receive all the Torah Hashem had to give. Hence, Kibel, he received whatever he could receive. And Yeshua, but whatever he received, he was able to pass on to his disciple Yeshua 100%. So in other words, Moshe got the Torah straightforward. Whatever he could receive from Hashem, he got it. He passed it on to Yeshua. Yeshua was a great Talmud. Natalie Yomish B'Techel never left the tent, was totally devoted to studying Moshe's lifestyle, and Moshe's approach to life, 24 hours a day. So he got it all. He passed on exactly what he get. And Yeshua gave it over to this kingdom. So this is the kingdom. This kingdom now a group. Now there's no individuals now. They were a group, and they were all people with Ruach HaKodesh, etc., and they're able to receive whatever Yeshua had to give them, and eventually passed it on to the Nevi'im. And the Nevi'im passed it on to the Anshe Knesset. So we have a direct chain, a direct childhood tradition, where everybody was able to hand over everything that he learned. In other words, in a simple word, there was no achlekes. There was no difference of opinion. It was the word of Hashem, the unvarnished word of Hashem, that started with Moshe's receiving Torah Sinai, which wasn't complete, because it can only be as complete as Moshe, which is more than good enough. At the same time, everyone else after that, etc., and they gave it over to the Anshe Knesset. Now all of a sudden we're talking about another group of people, Anshe Knesset, in whose lifetime things happened. What happened in their lifetime? The Mishal English was destroyed. What happened then? Nevuah came to an end. Nevuah, which ended with the prophet Malachi, came to an end again about that time. Hence, we had no Nevi'im. So we had no Nevi'im, so we didn't have access to the will of Hashem, to the word of Hashem that they had before that. And with the Anshe Knesset came the Yeridat Darot. In other words, Torah sensitivity, Torah schalish plunged. It wasn't what it was before. But yet, the Anshe Knesset, here they were, and they had a challenge. How do we keep the Torah alive? How do we keep it alive for the future? Here we are. We're going to go into the Galut right away, which of course they did in the year 70. How do we keep it alive? So the Anshe Knesset, Haim Amrishla Shadvarm. The Anshe Knesset give us 3 principles. Now the 3 principles were unanimous. Doesn't mention anyone by name. So of the 120 people who started out being the Anshe Knesset, according to one opinion, they were replaced as they passed on. According to another opinion, they only diminished in souls until they became non-existent. They faced this awesome responsibility, and they had to give what they regard as the constitution for the house of Israel, and they told us everything. They told us how to daven. They told us how to welcome Shabbos. They told us how to make Kiddush. They told us how to make Abdullah. They told us how to say Shema, what to say Shema. They told us how to say the Amidah, what makes up an Amidah, how do you begin it, how do you finish, everything. Whatever you wanted to know, they gave us the structure of Judaism as we know it today, and we have remained committed to Judaism because of the Anshinah Seder. Now they eventually came to an end as well, and the mission that we had after that was Shimon HaTzadik. Along came Shimon HaTzadik, a holy man, a very holy man, a Kohen Gadol for 40 years, a man who was very close to Hashem, and he was the last of the Anshinah Seder. And he gave us his three principles. What did he say? The world stands on three pillars. It's a tripod. If you don't have the three legs, it falls apart. It's not omeid. It can't exist. It has no future. And what were those things? Ala Torah, ala Vodah, Yad Milut Chasadim. Now last week I introduced you to the Avraham, who made an interesting comment. And that was Shimon HaTzadik. The mission that followed Shimon HaTzadik was English Yisroel. That English Yisroel represented something new now. What did he represent? First of all, it's a Greek name, it wasn't a Jewish name. And English Yisroel, he received from Shimon HaTzadik. Okay, now English Yisroel, it appears that with him something started. He was the greatest student of Shimon HaTzadik, and therefore he became the leader. And until then, the leadership of Israel, the credibility of the leaders of Israel wasn't only handed over to them by the previous generation, they were appointed as well. They were appointed the leader of Israel. And this began to change in these generations now. Why? Because that Messiah wasn't the same. The Messiah wasn't complete. No Nevuah, no Ruach HaKodesh, a different system. And so along came Antigonus Yisroel, etc., and he took over Shimon HaTzadik and Hu HaYomer. Now the Avraham, I quoted last week, makes the interesting comment that the following group of Talmidim in the next few Mishnayot, Antigonus Yisroel and Antigonus Yisroel and Yossi ben Yoezer. Let me see where I put my piece. Oh, here. Antigonus Yisroel, Yossi ben Yoezer, Israel, Yossi ben Yechon Ish Yerushalayim, they actually were following a fashion. Each one was elaborating on one of the points of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik says the world stands on three pillars, and the first one was Al Torah, Al Vodah, Al Milut Chasadim. Came along Shimon Antigonus Yisroel, and he stressed one of them. One of those three. And which one did he stress? Avodah. What does it mean the world stands on this leg called service? Avodah. Avodah meant Kabbalah and English, of course. Avodah was supplanted by tefillah, by the shuls, both the Knesset, both the Rosh, by Samigdash, and Migdash Me'at, etc., etc. So Antigonus Yisroel decided to try to explain what is Avodah. What is Avodah? And he was trying to find a level. He was trying to find a level that he could explain very carefully. And what was the level he chose? He said, don't be don't be like servants who serve Hashem Amanas Kabbalah Pras. Don't serve Hashem with a view in mind on condition no one receives reward. Do the opposite. Serve Hashem because you're supposed to serve Hashem. Serve Hashem because that's the thing to do. And what do you say? And the fear of God should descend upon you. It said, be like those who serve Hashem, Al-Manash Shalei L'Kabbalah Pras, the Meir Hashem Aleichem, and let the fear of God remain with you. You need to serve Hashem Me'yira, you need to serve Me'ava, both have to be there. That was him. That was on Tignish Yitzchak. On Tignish Yitzchak, we learned, as you recall, he had two Talmidim, who set the Jewish people back, and that was Tzaddik Ubesis, two Talmidim, and they heard these words, and for reasons best known to themselves, and many read into it that they were so inclined. It wasn't some just about a gist. They interpret these words as to say that there's no reward. So don't serve God for reward because there is no reward. Of course, he didn't say that. The words of the mission are clear. He said, don't serve God on condition, but serve God like you want to serve God, and of course there'll be a reward. Hashem offers rewards. It's in the Shema. It's going to be there, but that's not why you're serving God. So you had these Talmidim, Tzaddik Ubesis, who said, hang on, this doesn't make sense. We're working for nothing. We're not going to be rewarded at the end of the day. Is there a person who works for nothing? Is there a servant? Is there a servant who serves his master for no reason at all? And so they decided there's nothing there. They decided there is no Tchiyat HaMetim, there's no resurrection of the dead, there is no Olam Haba. In other words, no accountability. So if there's no accountability, you know Olam Haba, you can do whatever you want. And so they themselves gave birth to two sects, SECTS sects, who went their own way. From Tzaddik came the sect called the Sadducees. Sadducees were around for 200 years and did great damage to the Jewish people. And the Basisis from Baisis came forward, another group of people. Both had one point in common. What was the point in common? They said, we believe in the written Torah. Interesting. They believe in the written Torah. Unlike Reform Judaism today, they believe in the written Torah. They even believe it came from God. They believe that too. They believe in God. But they didn't believe in anything else. They didn't believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh. They didn't believe in oral law. No oral law, no halacha. No halacha, no Judaism. And so at the end of the day, what did they believe in? Eat, drink, and marry, for tomorrow we die. Enjoy life, hedonism. Now the Tzaddukim were a sect that were around for 200 years. They did great havoc to the Jewish people. Many even became Kohanim Gedolim. They came from the richer elements of the Jewish people, and so they had a following of their own, a great following of their own, and so many people were attracted to it. And besides, it's a good life. Who's not attracted to the good life? So that was their story. I pointed out in the last room that the commentaries point out that Tzaddik Ubesis were that way inclined. In other words, they were open to it. They were looking to be rebels. That's what they really wanted to do. Otherwise, they couldn't do it. Why did they say they believe in the Torah Shebiksav? Why did they believe that Torah and Shemaim? Because you could not believe. If you were to try to tell the people there is no God, or you try to tell them that the Chamisha will be taught, they would have killed you. You had no choice. So they had to develop a Judaism that gave them all the license they wanted, they needed, but at the same time, did not deny it was Hashem. That was built in. That was so built in to the thrust of Judaism that they had no choice but to accept it. So said the Avraham last week that in English Yisrocho, he took the attribute of Shimon HaTzadik called Avodah, and that's what he explained. And this week he says we have over here Yossi ben Yoezer, Yisrael Yossi ben Yerushalayim, and they also had a comment. They didn't comment on Avodah because we had that already. We now have an idea of Avodah. We're not going to get the further detail. We've done that already as to why this is what English Yisrocho chose to share with us. So they went as follows. Yosef ben Yoezer, he said he decided to elaborate on the Torah. What did Shimon HaTzadik say? Ala Torah, the world stands on the Torah. The world stands on the Torah, And so Yosef and Yehuda decided to set out for himself what exactly that means. What does it mean, stand in the Torah? And if you go back to the answer, they use the same language. If you're talking about Torah, you mean a lot of students. You mean raise a generation. Raise generations who are committed to the Torah, and that's what they were trying to do. So Yosef and Yezid traded, Yosef and Yerushalayim came along, and Yosef and Sreda said as follows. What does that mean now? What does that mean, Torah? And we're going to leave this open for the meantime because we just want to see his words. Said he, he said, now how do we assure that Torah is going to remain with the Jewish people? So we don't teach it. You teach children Torah, teach your students Torah, make many students, but at the end of the day, you had to work out. You had to have a program. Well, they had a program. They had a program which we don't know if we'll get into the detail today. But what was it all about? They said the only way that you can teach your children Torah is if your children see that Torah is important to you. And how are children going to tell how important Torah is to you is who comes to your house. Who comes to your house? You always say, who are your children's friends? He said, no, he said, not only your children's friends. Far more important, who are your friends? What are the people that you choose to have in your, what kind of people are they? What do they represent? Kids will never forget that. They'll never forget it all the days of their lives. These mommy and daddy's friends. So he said, what did he say? Your house should be a gathering place for the wise. Okay? Not so simple. What does it mean, a gathering place for the wise? That when wise men, means scholars, Talmidei Chacham, want to talk Torah, you know what he should say? Let's go to their own house. Let's go to Chaim David's house. Let's go to whoever's house. And that's where they want to talk. It's comfortable. Why is it comfortable? Because the people who are there, they are known to love Torah. They love Torah. They care Torah. And they're totally committed to Torah. And they want Torah to work. So that's what they say. You have to create a background. And when you're listening to them, sit at the dust of their feet. Sit as close as you can. Get as close as you can. Show that it matters. Show that it's important. Another way of putting it, don't treat them as guests in your house. Treat them as if you're guests in their house. It's such an honor for you to have them there, that you are the guest in their house. And drink their words with thirst. Never look like you had enough. Never look bored. Never act like, what do I need this for, etc., etc. That doesn't work. So you have to create an ambiance. You have to create a background. Create a background in which Talmidei Chacham feel at home. If you succeed in that, you'll get your message across. Why? Shimon HaTzadik said so. Wasn't it Torah? Now, all Yosef and Yezid is trying to add, how do we get there? What does that really mean? How do we get to this story that Shimon HaTzadik talked about? And that was his contribution. Right? And Rabbi now brings an interesting proof for this. He says, remember in Tanakh, there's a story of the Isha Shunamit, the Shunamit woman who was fascinated by Elisha. Elisha, the prophet, used to come by her house every now and then when he traveled, and etc., etc. And she said, since this is a holy man, since she said this is a holy man, she says, and he comes by frequently, let's build him a flat. Let's build Elisha a flat so when he comes here, he has a place to stay, where he can feel at home, where he'll have all the needs to rest, to meditate, etc. And that's what she was saying. You need the holy man, the Elisha, to feel at home in your house. If he feels at home in your house, you want to come. He'll want to come. And if he wants to come, he's going to bring his values with him, which will be a blessing unto your children and children's children to the end of days. Right. Right. Now, in discussing English Israel, we talked about the fact that the Tzedukim, they were less radical than the Misyavnim. Who are the Misyavnim? Completely Hellenized Jews. That's the Hanukkah story. Jews became totally Hellenized, and the Tzedukim became very wealthy and politically astute and struggled for religious control during the 2 centuries, entered the Second Temple, etc. And many times the Sadducees were in ascent. It looked like they were winning the war. It eventually faded away after a number of centuries. I'm quoting very wide now. There is no movement in Judaism that really lasted if it was devoid of Torah. If it was trying to take people away from the roots, it could last for a while. Until the fish out of the water of Rabbi Akiva. We talked about that the other time, right? And the Chazal understood that this deception of Antiochus' disciples, they were opposed to Torah discipline. They were looking for an excuse, and looking for an excuse to go their own way. They were looking for an excuse to be rebels, and they found it. And they developed these sects over here that did the Jewish people great harm for hundreds of years. All right. Now let me just move from here. All right. So now we finished with Antigonus. We have the idea. He was a good man, a fine man. He was a God Lador. Every one of these people till now were the giants of the generation, the God Lador. And the God Lador had to see as his own students distorted his message and brought about a total revolution and devastation that set the Jewish people back hundreds of years. Imagine how he felt, but there was nothing you can do about it. This is what happened, and the Chazal set it down as a fact. This is what it was all about. And then from Antiochus Soho came 2 students. Suddenly we're introduced to something interesting now. What do we have now? We have 2 students. In other words, leadership is not one man. It's not Moshe, it's not Yeshua, it's not Antiochus Agdola, it's not Shimon HaTzadik, it's not Antiochus too. And the students they were called Zugot. They were called Zugot, and they are the first members of the Sanhedrin. They're the first of the Sanhedrin, which was itself a Greek word, to share the influence on Hellenism on the Jewish people. That was itself a Jewish word. And the Zugot were Tanaim, the first of them. And the Zugot led the Jewish people during the transitional period, starting from the founders of the Second Commonwealth, going through the Hashmonaim and ending with the early Tanaim and Roman domination. Okay. In other words, Yosef ben Yezer and Yosef ben Tzreida, there were 2. From now on, for the next 5 generations, we introduced the 2 names. The 2 names meant that the leadership was divided among 2 people. 2 people. One was the head, was a Nasi. He was a political leader of the Jewish people. One was the head of the Bezdin, the Rosh Bedin. These 2 leaders each had their department. They looked after the well-being of the Jewish people. And they were called Tanaim. They were Tanaim, and they're the first of the Sanhedrin. So what do we have here? Now, the first thing, of course, we have is that there are 2. So if there's 2, there can be machlokes. Until this stage, we never heard of machlokes. There never was discussion among the sages. All of our learning through Mishnayos, Shas, Poskim, all of Jewish learning for thousands of years is about differences of opinion and how to resolve them. But they would not know what we're talking about. Until the Zugot came along, These great men, first of all, they were the Ador, and they weren't appointed. They were not appointed as I pointed this out last time, as I recall. And these were the people who hung around the earlier generation. They were great scholars. They were the greatest of the scholars, and hence they themselves were appointed by their peers. They didn't get their authenticity as part of that Masorah. They weren't part of that Masorah. And now it became a time where every generation had to appoint its own leadership, and they were the leadership. They were appointed as leadership by their generation, etc., etc., and they were the leaders of the Sanhedrin. One is Nosi, executive authority, the other Abezdin, in charge of the judicial procedural head of the court. This existed for two centuries, until the Beis Hamikdash, all right, etc., etc. Right. Well, let me read to you a few words of barrel wine here. The two Yosis that we have over here now, the Tanoim, first the Sanhedrin, were people of integrity, wisdom, faith, and self-sacrifice. Because of their efforts and accomplishments, the great basic works of Judaism, Tanakh, Mishnah, and Talmud survive and prosper to this day. Now here Rabbi Bear Wein, was the great historian. He is the great historian, and whenever I mention him, I like to say he's one of the nicest people I ever met. Of all the people I met many. I've had the privilege of meeting many, many great people, outstanding people. Beryl Wein was a totally different kettle of fish, a real Talmud Chacham, a practicing lawyer, a son-in-law of a Talmud Chacham in Detroit, a brother-in-law of Rosh Yeshivas in America, a real Talmud Chacham, and he made a decision to go on Aliyah, probably in the 60s or 70s. He made a decision to go on Aliyah. I remember reading where he wrote, there were two groups of people that thought he was crazy. Two groups of people thought he was crazy for wanting to go and live in Israel. The one of them, he said, were the lawyers. His colleagues in the law profession couldn't believe. What does he want that for? He's got a career. He's doing well. He's a respected rabbi. He's a Talmud Chacham. He's a Rebbe. He's got everything he wants, and prestige, and money. They couldn't get it. The people, he says, were even more convinced he was off the wall were the employees of the Jewish agency. They themselves, it was their job to promote Aliyah, looked at this guy and couldn't know what it was all about. But of course, Berlin knew what he was doing. He made a brilliant shiur in Israel. He was an outreach. He reached out to thousands and thousands of Jews. He taught Fruma Jewish history, gave him a sense of pride. He was a distinguished Talmud Chacham, visited South Africa often, and became a great friend of ours. So Beryl Wein quotes over here that Yossi ben Yoezer was martyred by the Greeks for teaching Torah to students. This Yossi ben Yoezer was killed by the Greeks. And the Medrash tells us that Yossi had a nephew, and the nephew's name was Yakim Ish Srod. Yakim Ish Srod was a modern guy. He became Hellenized, completely assimilated. Yakim was reading his horse on the Shabbos. When he saw his uncle being taken out for execution, and the gallows were being carried, the gallows were either being carried by him or somebody for him. Yaakov was sitting on a donkey, okay? And Yakim mocked his uncle, saying, look at the fine horse my master, the Greeks, gives me to ride. And look at the horse your master, God of Israel, forces you to ride. Look at the horse, meaning the crucifix you're soon going to be hung up on. And Yossi ben Yezer replied, as a true Talmud Chacham, with a straight eye and without emotion or passion, would reply. He said, "If the Lord rewards those who provoke Him, such as you, then how much more will He reward those who do His will?" If that's how Hashem rewards people who provoke Him, which you are, He says, how much more will He reward those who do His will? And so I'm the blessed one, not you. But carried on the nephew. But who does His will more than you do? Yeah, look what you're in, the nephew challenged. All right. And so Yossi ben Yezer replied, if such is the end in this world, for those who do this world, his uncle retorted, what will the ultimate end for those who provoke him? What will happen to those who provoke him? And listen to this, Yossi's calm and assured, yet pointed words, penetrated Yochim like venom from a serpent. Yochim repented and died from the trauma caused to his spirit and preceded his great uncle into Olam Haba, into Gan Eden. He preceded him. Interesting. Now, Brother Wine mentions another two anecdotes over here that come from the Gemara of uncles and nephews are not on the same page. They weren't on the same page, etc., etc. Okay. The most famous one concerns Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Everyone knows him, the preeminent sage and leader of the Jewish people in the period of the Churban Bayis Sheni. Right? His name Abba Sikra. Abba Sikra was one of the Jewish outlaws who were instrumental in the rebellion against Rome. He was part of those who rebelled against Rome and the eventual destruction of Beit HaMikdash and the Jewish Commonwealth. Rabbi Yochanan asked his nephew to arrange a secret meeting with the Romans and try to convince him that the rebellion was causing fatal harm to the Jewish people, was doomed to failure. Rabbi Yochanan wanted Abba Sikra's help in leaving Yerushalayim to meet Vespasian, the Roman general who was besieging the city. The nephew felt so totally beholden to his people there, he couldn't get out of it. Unable to extricate himself from a following that had become suicidal and murderous of their own brethren, he told Yochanan ben Zakkai, put yourself into a coffin, smuggle out of the besieged city, etc., and arrived at the camp of Vespasian, convinced the German conqueror to grant him wishes to eventually guarantee Jewish survival. The long exile was then. These are the famous Gemaras we read on Tisha B'Av, where he gave him the few things he needed that guaranteed Jewish survival. And here, Beryl Wine adds a P.S. In modern Jewish history as well, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was arrested during Stalin's reign of terror by his nephew. Arrested by his nephew, also Schneerson, who was captain in the Soviet police. It seems the old uncle is always wrong and impedes progress, until eventually the wise nephew is taught differently by life's experience, which eventually catch up with you. Anyhow, as we said before, until this point there was no room for machlokes, no difference of opinion. But now you had Yossi ben Yezer and you had Yossi ben Yochanan, and they're the first recorded machlokes in Shas. The first recorded machlokes was between these two Tanoim over here that are responsible for the next Yossi ben Yochanan Ish Chaim. Yossi ben Yochanan is trader. Yossi ben Yochanan Shloim. They had the first machlokes, and the first machlokes was an interesting thing because of the disruption in Jewish life caused by the arrival of the Greek rule, a lack of clarity regarding ritual practices. Things became not so clear, and perhaps the death of Shimon HaTzadik and the conflicts regarding the strange new temple of Chonu in Egypt, which contributed as well. We'll leave that for now. In any case, the first disagreement concerned a detail of the Beit HaMikdash. When the Kabbanas were brought in the Beit HaMikdash, whether there had to be smicha. The Chaim would place his hands very tightly on the head of the sacrifice. That was called smicha. All right. This agreement occurred whether the required leaning with both hands on the sacrifice should be done on Yom Tov, a festival, which is Yom Tov, or against the degree of putting one's weight on an animal Yom Tov. All right, I said that was the first machlokes. Do we do a smicha on the korban on the korban the doba on Yom Tov. That was the first. Of course, it wasn't the end at all, etc., etc. All right. I'm about to stop here because we'll leave it till now. But let me just add one more word here. What did he say? If you want the Kesser of Torah, if you wanted Torah to pass on to the next generation, so the Tanner Yossi and Yezi, Ishprei, what did he say? You got. What do you do? And funny thing, he wasn't direct. He said, create an ambience. Create an ambience. Imagine that. He said, and Beryl Wine has a paragraph over here, which is true to life, and one would have to have known something about America to know this. Beryl Wine was for 8 years a rabbi in Miami Beach. He had a great impression there, but that was only a stop on the way. He had much bigger things on his plate, and he moved on to America, to New York, where he achieved great things in New York City, and eventually we went on Aliyah, as we said before. All right. And now he said, now in America, most of the Gedolei Yisrael, the giants of Israel who came after the war, those who brought Torah with them from Europe and transplanted it in America, most of them lived in New York. New York is freezing. New York winter is not a place to be in. New York winter we saw never heard of. But Beryl was rabbi in Florida. There was not a Rov Hasidic Rebbe who didn't come to spend weeks, if not months, in Florida every winter. And so all of a sudden, Florida became a niche of Torah. All of a sudden, Daf Yomi in winters became the in thing to this day, to this very day. And Beryl Wine had this chus of being a Rov there for 8 years. And so he has a few lines over here where he says the great honor that he had, the honor he had to have these giants in his home every year, and the impact it had on his children. And here he stresses what he said before: don't be so concerned with who your kids' friends are. Worry that your kids should be concerned who your friends are. And so you have to create an ambience which creates a Mokum Torah, an ambience where people are proud to have Torah in their lives. And then he goes on to explain how does one put that into action? How does it make it happen? I've gone over time. We'll stop here and I'll finish this mission next time. Thank you. Sorry I wasn't as prepared.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Ron,
everyone.
Thank you,
Shiva.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Lovely to hear you. Thanks, Mr. Shiva. Thanks, Kaya. Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.